Hey, welcome back to The Craft, where we explore what we're learning about the creative process. I'm Colby, and I'm here with my friend Carter, and this is episode 4 of Creative First Principles, a 4-part series on the building blocks of the creative process. Today, we're talking about sustain.
Yeah, so this is our final episode of the series, and just to kind of catch people up on what the series has been on, creative first principles being the kind of building blocks or the foundational movements of the creative process. And really, we wanted to just kind of give this basic trellis, which a lot of our subsequent conversations will probably center some way in relation to these 4 major pillars or building blocks, or however you want to conceptualize them, which each of the pillars are create, revise, share, and then now we're on our final one, which is sustain, which I'm excited to talk about tonight. And so, how we've been approaching these, we've taken our first principles and we're asking kind of first principle questions of the principles. So, we've been going through what, why, how, where, and when. And so, that's going to be the game plan tonight as well. Colby, do you have anything to add about the framework that we're working with, or?
I'm excited about tonight's topic, and if you haven't listened to the other 3 episodes, then I would recommend going back, starting at the first one. And I mean, because it is a linear process, so you can listen to them out of order, but it's going to be best experience to go through one at a time. That's all I got.
For sure. Okay. Well, our first question is, what do we mean by sustain? Do you want to start us off on this?
Sure. So I think for sustaining creativity is, I think you mentioned this before the call. I think we're thinking about it the same way already, but really there's sustaining big picture, sustaining for the long term of your career or your life as an artist, and then sustaining in the well, I guess they're sustaining like in the day to day of what you're doing in your craft. Maybe sustaining your work through like a full big project, an album, a book, a paper, whatever it is. And there's kind of just more like the micro version of sustaining, I suppose, which is probably a lot of different ways that you could apply that. But how would you break it down?
That makes sense. And so one of the things I was thinking about, and you even mentioned linear to begin with, this process in some ways is linear. Like you create, you revise, then you share, and sustain being, okay, how do we keep going? But in another way, it's not really linear because, like we talked about with revision, I feel like we're constantly going back and forth with revising something, creating something, right? We might share something, get feedback, go back to revision, go back to creation. And so I think one of the ways I was conceiving of this is that this process matures. It may not be quite linear, but it does mature. Like you're going to create before you share. There's no other way really around doing that. So there's definitely a progression, a maturing of the process. But you're kind of, we might oscillate back and forth. And so as I was thinking about sustain, I thought about, and kind of how you said big picture, there's the sustaining that happens after a project, right? You work on something, you get it finally sent out. There's the share. And then it's almost like a recovery. Even like, recovery after a heavy day of lifting at the gym or something like that. The next day, it's recovery day. What does that look like for the creative process? That's what I want to think about tonight. But not only that, sustaining is not just a step after something's done. Like there's also a sustaining that has to happen during the process and that it's present on every single one of the principles that we've talked about. What does it look like to sustain during these other processes, right? Or during these other moments of the process. And so I was kind of in a very similar way thinking about the big sustain being the idea of recovery, but then also these little sustains, which is, how do you keep the energy going? How do you keep inspiration going? How do you keep forward momentum? And so I guess broadly, what do we mean by sustain? We mean, what does it take to perpetuate? I don't know, to keep endurance, to I don't know. How do we want to say it? How do you keep the fire burning for the creative process? I don't know if
finish
that's
the
too
race,
cheesy.
kind of. Yeah. I mean, but I like what you added because I really missed the piece of like, if you look through this step by step, create step 1, revise step 2, share step 3, sustain step 4. then you can almost look at sustain as like maybe taking a break or pausing before you or doing whatever things we're going to talk about later today uh, to restore your soul, your creativity before you go back to step one and create again. So I like that a lot because I kind of hadn't thought about it that way before you said that.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I was just thinking, I'm like, is this a cycle? Is it a
Yeah.
step-by-step process that you rinse and repeat? Uh, or
Mm,
is it more like, I don't know, like a compass face where we've got these 4 different things and we're kind of moving back between them almost?
mm.
Um, I don't know. I'm reluctant to say this is
I like
just
that image.
yeah, I don't know. I just kind of thought of that, but I'm reluctant to say it's just a process, like we complete it, then we do it again, complete it, do it again. It seems more dynamic, and we've talked about that. And so for sustain, yeah, maybe how does it fit? I think we've got to both acknowledge taking a break, revitalizing, and then also that I don't know, sustention? Sustention? Is that a word? It's
What?
probably not a word.
I don't know if that, I don't
I
know.
don't think it is. Um, how do you
Sustaining. I don't know.
Hey, I don't know. How do
I
you
don't know what
keep
you're trying to
things
say.
moving, in the
Yeah.
process? And so
Yeah.
maybe, Colby, why don't you start? Like, do you take breaks after you complete a big project? What does that look like? I know that's something this year you've been thinking a lot about, and so maybe let's start there.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to say something before we dive into that, if it's okay. I feel like I was just going to say I'm excited to talk about this because I feel like it's something that I'm working through, thinking through, or want to think through because of where I feel like I'm at in my life right now. Just feeling like with music, particularly, sort of feeling like I have a weird relationship with it right now where I don't feel like I'm in the space I was when I started music, where I was so excited and so fired up and so inspired all the time. And I feel more like in a place of, you know, trying to handle how much work can I handle taking on for other people. And it's been a long time since I've really just made music for myself and kind of been very like playful with it and just made stuff. And I feel, I guess, a lot more like pressure when I make something now. And so I guess just like for me, I feel struggles of like staying inspired, not getting burnt out or overwhelmed or putting a ton of pressure on myself in music. So there's like a lot of problems that I feel, psychologically, emotionally around creating and music specifically, because it doesn't really affect me as much in like my work in marketing. I feel like it's a lot easier for me to like bounce around different ideas and keep making new things. And I feel more healthy the way that I sustain because I have to clock in at 8, I have to clock out at the end of the day. And, I don't really choose whether I work. I just need to do it to get a paycheck. And with music and creativity, it's more like, I do that on my own. So I just wanted to say, like, I feel like there's a lot of questions and struggles that I have that make me excited to talk about this because, this is just us figuring it out. And I do want to sustain for the long term, So,
Yeah, I think I mean, that's great grounding the conversation, into the process and into where we're at, and that makes me wanna maybe talk about the in progress sustaining, so maybe not maybe let's table the big kind of post share,
okay.
what does that look like? And let's, yeah, maybe get
Sure.
into, um, what it looks like to sustain during a project, and maybe I can jump into this if you want.
Yeah, that would be great for sure. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah, the notes that I kind of, put down were thinking about what are those things that are micro that help me sustain? I mean, the day to day things, the celebrating those little victories, like, I mean, even down to like a cup of coffee in the afternoon or switching up the context of where I'm working, right? Going to a coffee shop. I was kind of dead this afternoon. And so Cassie and I went off to a coffee shop and finished up the workday. And it was a big boost, right? I mean, just a changing environment, being mindful of being mindful that writing and working is an embodied process is really helpful for me because we're in a place and we're working with things, whether we're working with different mediums on a computer, a longhand with a pen and paper. All of these factors for me, they inform this ability to continue working because I think the thing that I fight a lot is just getting, if things get too monotonous, I just, my momentum just screeches to a stop.
Yeah.
If I'm just doing the same kind of thing, it's just really hard for me to continue um, a big cohesive effort in one direction. And
Mhm.
so I feel like I'm always trying to um, be mindful of these little things that I can do that are like these little advantages. Like, okay, it's in the afternoon. Maybe we can go somewhere else. Maybe that'll help. Or maybe I've been working on this. I'm going to shift tasks. And so I try to look for those small things um,
Yeah.
that can help. That's kind of practical. Um, the less practical, more abstract thing is, I don't know, there's a certain grounding that I feel like I need every day. Like I have to like rehearse, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? Try to, I don't know, sanctify the day in a way, like set it apart and say, okay, this is the day that I've got. Like, what am I going to do with it? And so I don't know. I feel like I have to rehearse that a lot day to day. Um, and as sometimes to my detriment, scheduling is not very is not a strong suit because a lot of times I'm just focused on like the one task that I'm doing. Because
Mm.
if I get too concerned with everything that's due in the month, like it almost puts me in a paralysis in a way of I don't know which way to go and I'm going 100 directions and I'm not, batching or monotasking or doing any of these things. But if I can just kind of quiet my schedule in a way and say, okay, I'm just reading this book right now. That's what I have to do this afternoon. I don't know. Little things like that, I think,
Yeah.
help keep me not only productive, because productive is not the goal in itself, but it keeps me. I don't know if this is making sense, but it keeps me um, attentive. Like there's intention still there. Um, I get to be active with it because that's all I'm concerned about there. And so, if we're thinking about sustaining through a process or through a project, I think the small things, taking time, scaffolding, um, they really help me. And so it's not like a magic thing that I can do. It's like what are the things I have to do every day?
Mm.
I, and you've
Right.
helped me think about this some. Like we've talked a lot about like building habits. It's like what are the things I need to do
Mhm.
every day to remind myself of why I'm doing it, and to get that kind of fire in my belly and the thumos or that joy even. It's like you got to kind of prod it until it happens. It's I don't know. That was a lot of
So
rambling, but
no, that was
small
there's some
things.
good stuff in there, I think. I mean, the idea of taking small moments in your day, small habits, and using those to move the project forward. Because we are kind of talking about how this affects your day to day right now. The more we talk, the more I'm seeing this kind of interconnection. I mean, really, sustaining for your career is kind of directly tied to sustaining your day to day life. I think because I mean, uh, the way that you live your day to day life is going to be how you live your long term life, really. And so I think that this is kind of all interconnected. This idea, maybe we will talk about them in two different sections here, but I really like the idea that you just mentioned of how can I ground myself in this day and use it well and focus on a small habit, because especially something like a big project, which we've talked about before, uh, it takes a long time. You can't build a building in one day. You have to take, the 10 bricks that you can put down that day. You lay those bricks, and the next day you keep working, and then eventually you have a wall, but you have to make 10 walls. You know what I mean? And so
Exactly.
it really is just like a iterative process and a slow process that takes habits and consistency. And I
Dude,
think
I love
that
that
that's why.
metaphor. I really like that metaphor. And just small interjection here. Like it's
Mhm,
finding that meaning and joy in the 10 bricks that you put down, which is
mhm,
hard. Like you got to get like really kind of focused on that, because it's easy to say, okay, I've got 10 more walls to do. But like when you start enjoying the process of, okay, those 10 bricks are in a row, like, I don't
mhm.
know, it just helps me because the big picture can become quickly paralyzing.
Yeah.
Small interjection, but
It just
you're on a
just
roll there.
over yeah, just looking at the whole big picture of maybe a goal or a project, for me, that might be I'm making an album, and I look in and I say 10 songs, and I know what each song takes, and so that can be overwhelming. And I really can't think at that level if I'm going to get anything productive done, or not only productive, but just like a simple task done, like, right. So everything does have to be broken down into smaller pieces. Um, and to speak from where I'm at right now, kind of more on the struggling side of how it's hard to sustain, I guess. Uh, I feel like there's just an aspect of things can get heavy. That was one of the words that I read in this book. I pulled out this book today, "Keep Going" by Austin Kleon, who wrote "Steal Like an Artist." I think this is the second book in the 3-part series of books. And one of the things he said is that an artist can get too heavy with their work. They can get heavy and really just feel so much pressure on everything that they create, every little piece of art, every brick that they're putting down each day, to the point where there's not any joy in the work. There's so much stress in your mind around how is this going to perform? How are people going to hear this? How's it going to be received? Kind of the performance aspect of your art, or maybe the metrics online, the views and the subscribes and those kinds of things. And your mind gets really clouded. And the challenge of another quote from that book is that a person who's creative or doing art is always going to be there. Oh man, I should find it, but it basically said creative people will always be doing things they don't know yet. The idea that you're always going to be in a position of, I don't know how to do this, if you're pushing yourself to actually be creative, which is kind of a weird idea, because if you look at like the world, we prize professionalism or expertise in these things. And so there's definitely something to be said about expertise, but if you're going to tap into creativity, you kind of need this willingness to fail and look silly and make something that's awful and do something you've never done before. And it's just easier and more comfortable to do the same thing again, make the song that sounds like the other one I made that I felt good making. Um,
Mm.
so I think basically all that to say, he really dives in on that section about heaviness to say one of the best things you can do to break out of that is to play. And like maybe that means, practical example he gave was, if you're having a hard time being playful with your painting or with your songwriting, try to make the very worst thing that you can make, the worst song, the worst painting. And it's a fun way to just like remember all the things you know not to do and just do those and just screw around and kind of relieve yourself from the pressure. And then the other thing he said in that section was this idea of write a poem and then burn it, throw it away, don't let anyone else read it, and just kind of teach yourself, remind yourself there's value in just making something without sharing it, without putting it on my story on Instagram, without doing anything like that. There's value in just making something and then burning it and telling yourself up front that you're going to burn it, so that you really can uh, do whatever you want and not feel any of that pressure to make something good. And so I don't know, that's something that I also heard. I was at an arts feedback group recently, and someone mentioned the idea of just getting into a playful place and making something that was really goofy as a way to rekindle their creativity. And so I've kind of heard this in two places over the past couple of weeks. And so it's like, maybe that's something that I should really dive into more with music, because I do feel like I'm in that place where things are heavy and they don't need to be.
Dude, I really like that. I think that's a helpful idea. I mean, there's certainly a lightness that we've talked about. Even if you go back to our first episode of creation, like turning on the spigot. I think we talked about. I think you mentioned Ed Sheeran
Mm-hmm.
gave that example. But yeah, I mean, there's certainly a playfulness that can be very helpful. And I resound with your comment about. I think you said balance, and that was one of the things that I've written down. Like, it's really helpful for me just to get away from it. And this kind of gets into the bigger sustain ideas. But going outside and picking weeds, or like cutting the grass,
Mm-hmm.
is really helpful for me. I mean, just going outside and walking around with the dog in the afternoon. It's something that again grounds you in a place, and you're just, if you get so fixated, I feel like, on the work, then
Mhm.
it can really not be healthy. Yes, you need time and you got to spend deep work. Yes. But at the same time, if things are heavy, like, you're not gonna help your work by just making it heavier. Like, you get,
Mhm.
like, go do something and remind yourself of where you are and the people you're around and the relationships that matter. Um, and, like, I don't know, I see that as such a big part of the, like, sustained process. And, one of my favorite poets, Robinson Jeffers, who have done a lot of work on, like, he was a stonemason. He would write poetry and he would work with stone. And it was this, like, balance of, like, this extremely physical, manual, tactile encounter with the world with clear goals, and then, like, the abstract of that, of, like, writing poetry. Uh, and I feel like there's got to be some, like, sustain. To me, one of those key words is like a balance. There's got to be like a balance of
Mhm.
playfulness, right? You got to play, but you
Right.
also got to take serious. If you're just serious, right, you're, that it can become self defeating.
Definitely. I love that.
I'm
I
a
love that
fan.
idea of just breaking away from the work. I think that there's the idea of breaking away daily, weekly, maybe like a Sabbath, like a Sunday, Saturday, um, breaking away monthly or quarterly, breaking away annually, breaking away every 6 or 7 years, like a sabbatical kind of thing. I don't know. I recently read this book, Rest, by, I don't remember who it was by, but it was a guy who's worked with a lot of startups in Silicon Valley, which is a very fast paced environment, very high output, high energy, 80 hours a week, work week kind of, culture. That's what he describes in the book. And he kind of talks about throughout history all these different people who were successful and creative in so many different realms of life, whether it's Dwight Eisenhower in the war or C.S. Lewis as an author or whoever it is throughout history. He goes to all these people and he kind of draws out what habits they take. And a lot of the things, I mean, the whole book was about rest. It was about not working in all the ways that is not like an optional thing, but it's like he calls it the flip side of the coin. One side is work and one side is rest, but it's the same coin, and that's your whole life. And so that book has been, I mean, there's so much I could go into on that, but he talks about sabbaticals, he talks about exercise, morning routines, daily walks,
Mm.
recovery. Like, one interesting story I'll share on that from that book that was pretty crazy. I don't remember. I'm not very good at history, and so I don't remember which World War it was. But Dwight Eisenhower had this war cabin that he didn't tell anyone about, except for very close people in his on his team. Like, only a few select people knew about this. There was no business, no phone, no calls, no communication. Um, and I mean, this is in the middle of a war. There was actually a bomb hole in the ground near this cottage, and it was on a golf course, I believe, and or somewhere with some open space and very secluded. And he would go here pretty regularly and unplug. No work was allowed, no conversations were allowed. There were no deal making or planning or anything happening here. It was just a place for him to go. And I don't know if it was golf or what sport it was, but he was just like playing games, maybe had a dog there, reading, relaxing, doing nothing. And I mean, he's in the middle of a war. And it's kind of that extreme example of like, I'm not um, in the middle of like a war. And I sometimes feel like I don't have time to do that kind of thing of like retreat, or take a break or step away. So that was a pretty inspiring story from the book of just someone who saw the importance of, if he's going to lead well, he has to rest, he has to disconnect. And it's because I think I can look at rest and unplugging sometimes as a little bit irresponsible in a way. Like, you just need to charge forward, you just need to white knuckle it, work harder. But that is not sustainable, it's not healthy. And you especially don't want your leaders to just be the ones who are just driving and working so hard, and then they're pushing you and working so hard and everyone's burnt out, and you know what I mean? So that was, I know that was a long tangent, but that book just really like hammered all these ideas home to me and really inspired me.
That's great. I mean, the idea that you can't be on call 24/7. And by being on call, like we don't have undivided attention to give. And like there's a limit of like focus. And we've talked about this before. Yes, you can focus and you've got to sit down and get through barriers to focus, but you can't spend the whole day focusing. It just doesn't work like that. Right. And I love
Mhm,
the example of the coin. It's like even in our lives, we go to sleep. Right. I mean,
mhm.
every day is a little death and resurrection in the morning. Right. Every there's these rhythms that are in our daily lives, like you said, that get kind of expanded into seasons, into years. Um, and I love that we got down to the daily because you just can't stay locked on. And even in like a dire circumstance like, World War II or something with Eisenhower, I mean, how much discipline does it take to not be constantly on? And I love that you said, yeah,
Truly.
we can look down on that, and that's just part of this. I feel like a lot of part of our culture of you got to be productive, you got to be productive, be efficient, right? Put out all these sort of things. Where if you tell someone that you took like a 15-minute nap in the afternoon, you're like, they shoot you like a dirty glance, like, oh, you took a nap. It's like, why do we got this? Like, why do we have this culture against naps? I love a good afternoon nap.
That was one of the chapters
Oh,
in that
really?
book. Yeah,
Nice.
100%.
No, I think that's helpful. And so, kind of expanding here to the bigger rhythms of rest for me, being in academia for a while, we've got
Mhm.
very specific rhythms, and that's part of what I really enjoy. 2 semesters, a summer break, a winter
Yeah,
break, right? And it's just a way that you can kind of work into, I'm finishing a semester right now. And one of my habits is after the spring semester, I reread A River Runs Through It by Norm Maclean, and I just enjoy it. Right? I've been thinking, I've been doing literary criticism for whatever 8 months, right, as my job, and then I just come to this novel and just enjoy it. And it's like a shift. It's like a spring's happening. I'm getting out. I'm hopefully getting on the river, doing some fishing. My schedule's becoming a little bit different, and that's just a time that I really enjoy, and it's important for kind of pivoting into the next year. And so, kind of getting into some of those bigger post project things. The summer for me is just a really meaningful time to get into stuff that is non obligatory, things that I don't have to
mhm,
do, but I've been waiting to do. And so, giving, I think, maybe working in space to be able to do those things that you like to do, but you haven't made time for,
mm.
it can be really helpful, but you don't do it just to make yourself more productive, right? You do it because you need to, and it's healthy and it's good. Um, yeah, I don't know.
What are some of those things that you do? I mean, I'm guessing I know you do some different writing, like more creative writing in the summers, is that right? Some of that
Yeah,
stuff? Or
a lot of it's reading based. I read things that I've been wanting to get around to, and I'll do some more writing. But then I also just enjoy doing things that are not school and not teaching. And yeah, I mean, getting out and about in the summer is just
Mhm,
so important to me, um, especially when it's warmer. Trying to get out and fish to me is like it's really important for my year. Um, in a way that it just again it's one of those things that takes you outside of what you're doing. It grounds you in a certain place with a certain task with a different sort of list of priorities. Right, my priorities are like, okay, do I have the right fly? How do I cast to this position? Is that it's like they're just so small, and you can just think about them, and you're suspended in a way where you're not in the constant pull of all these different tasks. You've got one task and you just kind of soak that in. Um, and so for me, the summer is a really helpful time, even if I'm just working and doing different tasks. That is a big switch. And so I was going to say, right, that's something that may be more difficult for you to do because you
yeah.
don't have you don't have a summer break in that way.
I know, you got me kinda jealous right now because it is a I mean, you will probably work at some capacity in the summer too, so it's not all that
Yeah.
different, but there's not really like a off switch to the work. It's just kind of an ongoing forward motion for me, so that is kind of a different thing, and I'm grateful to be done with college, like, I don't wanna go back, but, I do appreciate that rhythm, and I love that for you. It sounds like it's really I love that you have a rhythm and habit even to the way that you end this semester. It's really cool.
Yeah, and so I guess I'll kind of sum that up and say, think about the ways that perhaps you can work in habits, large habits of work. I mean, that's just tough when you don't have, complete control of your schedule. Like, I know that. And so I
Mhm.
definitely recognize that it's kind of a special thing that I get to do in switching into a different kind of work and schedule during the year. But still, I think it's worth thinking about what are those things that we do after something's completed. So, what is your semester?
Yeah.
What's your big project? And how do you recover um, before you get into the next thing?
Mhm. One of the things I wrote down from the Keep Going book was this idea of he talks about creative seasons of life. And I think that's almost exactly what you're describing right now, where you had a sort of maybe the seasons don't really map out to the actual season of the year, but the metaphor is like you've been working hard all spring long, working on, or all winter and spring working on literary work and teaching and doing a grading and all these kind of things, and then you kind of like shed your leaves in the summer, you know what I mean, like creatively, and you go dead on that work, and then you're doing some other things, but all through that process of a tree losing its leaves and then going through a cold winter, and you don't see any growth happening, but it's there and it's slow and it is growing, it's staying healthy, it's being fed by the rain, it's weathering the storm, and then it comes out in the spring and it makes something new. And I don't know, reading that today for me was really encouraging because I was like, I can sort of feel discouraged if I'm not, oh, it's been a long time since I've put something out, or I don't really feel like I'm working on something big right now, or I just feel, and it's kind of like maybe I'm just, I've shed the leaves and it's time to just exist for a little bit. And maybe I'll come back at another point and there'll be a lot of work that comes out for a time. And then I'll take another break and it'll be a couple years. And it's like, if you look at some of the artists that I really respect, I mean, Kendrick Lamar just dropped his announcement about the album. And I think it's been, I should look it up, but I think it's been 3, maybe 4 years since his last album, I would guess. I could be wrong, but it's been at least 2. And I feel like you look at authors of books. How long does it take an author to write an 800-page fantasy novel or a sequel to a sci-fi book or whatever it is? It takes years sometimes, world building and crafting characters and um, making movies. Like you look at all of these things and they are very zoomed out long-term projects. You can't look at the day to day and kind of judge that person on, well, you're not putting out enough
Yeah,
because they're working on
exactly.
something at such a different level. And so I think just that's just something that's been on my mind is like, I don't want to feel like I'm constantly trying to put out work 12 months of a year.
You
I want to
can.
figure out how I can sort of have like an ebb and flow where I'm like, yeah, I'm not really working that much on music during these 3 or 6 months
Yes.
because that's my off season.
Yeah.
And then I'm coming back at a different point whenever it's time. I've heard John Bellion does that with music. I think Andy Mineo said in an interview, he was saying like that John Bellion will just be completely cut off from music for months and then play the piano for a minute, have a song idea, call the manager, book studio time, like boom, 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 make calls. It's time to make an album. And it's just kind of like on again. And I don't know, just hearing that was really cool for me because I was like, I don't want to constantly feel like I'm on the treadmill of creating content. I want to be ready to say something when there's time to be said. And you also just need to go back and live your life a little bit so you have something to say too.
Yeah. Dude, I mean, I think the cultural incentives are more tangible stuff that's disposable. Think about
Hmm.
what's
Yeah.
incentivized on social media platforms. More stuff. Okay, you got something that was really successful, more of it because that's going to last about 25 seconds if you're lucky on somebody's feed and it's gone. Like it's so cheap. Like
Right.
it's so disposable. Like it's the I'm not on TikTok, but seems to be the most disposable of all the social media. It's like ephemeral. The content is there, it's processed, it's gone, it's into the void, right? And then you have to do something else because everyone's vying for this attention, for this tangible. And it's like that is so outside of the craft. If we go back to our title, it's like you just can't, like, that's not sustainable. And that's a bad model of I'm trying
Mm,
to make as much as I can all the time and I
mhm,
can't even stop. I'm on that treadmill. I think is a great analogy.
mhm.
I mean, look at anything. You have to have breaks worked in. Um, I mean, even with sports
Right.
seasons, they have off seasons. Why? Because they
Mm,
need it. It's not like you can just perpetually
yeah,
be doing something. But I do think the cultural incentives are strong. I mean, the
for
cultural
sure.
incentives are strong that you need to be producing and you need to be doing it right now. And if it's not working, the only solution is do more.
Yeah. So I guess with that, sort of answered it already, but when do you sustain?
Yeah. And
Because I
so
feel like that ties in with what we're saying here.
when do you sustain? I think for me, I've kind of talked about it a little bit in the summer and that sort of thing. Um, but even I think I'm learning that I need times of the day. I used to do a lot more work in the evening, and thankfully, I've been able to um, get most of my work done now during the day, and that's been really big. It's nice to have, and that's even getting married has helped me. Okay, I need to have time in the evening where
Mhm.
I can disconnect, and that's been important to me. So in the evenings are I try to keep those as free as I can, and the summer's a big one, and so those are kind of my two
Yeah.
wins. What about you?
I think what's challenging is sometimes the evenings are my, time to get music work done, you know? I've sort of started transitioning that a little bit to working from 7 to 8 in the mornings on music. So, like, waking up around 6:30, working for an hour, and then getting into my normal work, which has been a little bit better because I know I've mentioned on another episode, I kind of tracked hour by hour when I was most energized and inspired each day, really just energized. And I saw that it was consistently from 7 to 12 or 8 to 12 every day. And then there's this huge drop off in energy. So for me, I'm just learning more and more, seeing that pattern play out where if at 5, 6 o'clock, like this time right now when we're recording in the evening after dinner, is honestly not a really good, this is a good time to talk, good time to hang out and do something relaxing like this. But it's not the best time to try to sit down and like make a song or
Sure.
do something creative
Sure.
because I feel more just I'm tired from my workday. It's getting later. I honestly just want to go watch a show or just like do something relaxing and soothing. And instead, I feel like I have to kind of work a lot harder just to get myself to a good place. So I've just been noticing if it's not going well and I'm hitting some walls, it doesn't feel fun, it doesn't feel playful. It feels frustrating. It feels like I just want to get this done to get through it. So it's just a lot harder in the evening. So for me, I think haven't even answered the question, but I think evenings I'm learning more and more are just I need to get better at really like setting evenings aside and saying best thing I can do for my creative and career and all of that and just life in general is to do nothing right now. Because I mean, really, for a couple of years, the evenings have just been that time where I've been like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to knock out that thing, I'm going to make that music, I'm going to call these people, and there's just all this, and then this
Yeah.
whole laundry list of things I'm trying to do every single night of the
Yeah.
week when I'm not doing something else like this, and so I'm trying to. For me, I can be more addicted to work, I think, and struggle to just enjoy doing nothing for an evening, and so
Yeah.
it's just like there's a lot of growth that I could still do in this whole sustain area, I think. And then another one, I guess, is uh, I'd like to get better at and continue to get better at doing Sabbaths pretty consistently each week and trying to unplug. Kind of go back and forth on like how seriously I want to do that. Like, do I consider music something that's restful, or do I want to kind of
Sure.
so maybe I work on music Sundays,
Sure.
or do I say like, no, let's not, let's cut that off completely and really just go on a bike ride or do something with
Yeah.
friends or hang out and relax. Um, so that's something to debate. And then I've been taking more or less, except for the exception of working on one song, I've really taken the last 3 months off of doing music and that has been really good. I might continue that for a few more months, but I'm kind of starting to pick up some other projects, and
Yeah.
so kind of trying to figure out that whole like creative seasons thing, like the longer break. Trying to
Yeah.
figure that out right now.
Dude, that's tough. I mean, that's tough because it's like I feel like mine's prescribed, but you kind of have to navigate it yourself.
Right.
Um, and yeah, I think I mean, here's a big thing. I think it's about asking this question, being cognizant of it, because you're never going to establish these rhythms if you're not looking for the rhythms. And I feel like that's kind of where you're at right now. I
Yeah.
mean, you're trying to figure out, okay, what are the rhythms that work and are sustainable? And the first step of that is just being attentive to it and asking. And so I think that's exactly where you have to be on it. It's something that takes a
Yeah.
while to figure out. And one of the things I was just thinking is, um, I wonder if it'd be helpful if you kind of switched up context too, like just grabbing a guitar and going out in the park or something, and just kind
Mm.
of playing around to yourself. Or I don't know, do you move a lot? Like, do you always work like at your desk? I know a lot of your stuff is on the computer, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, maybe switching up a context could be fun or interesting. I know it helps
Yeah, I
me
like that
to go
idea.
outside sometimes and write or just like physically move, and it's like I'm
Yeah.
doing a different task in a different way in a different place.
Yeah, I like that. I sometimes work on a kitchen table, sometimes work at this desk. Those are my two main places. Might go record somewhere else. So I could definitely experiment with that for sure. And I think definitely the big thing for me that I'm feeling more interested in doing is just making funny or goofy or playful art of some sort and not
Yeah,
posting it, not sharing it with anyone, but just needing to go back. I think I need to go back to some kind of what can I make that's like goofy or fun for me and feels really light and life giving. And maybe it's just something that I share with a friend for a joke or share with no one. You know what I mean? Because I
yeah,
think maybe that could get me back to uh, feeling lighter about the work and not feeling like everything is going to be shared. Because I think it's pretty simple. I think it comes down for me to if everything's going to be shared that I'm creating right now, I need it to sound good and not sound weird or break any rules or ruffle any feathers. It needs to just be
yeah,
like good. But that's not really like none of the art that I appreciate is that it's like either weird or, makes a big statement or a bold statement
yeah,
or pushes the limits. Like it's so you got to do weird, risky things to get to those places and you're probably going to say the wrong thing or say something that you shouldn't say and then you have to wrestle with okay, do I put this out? But you can't be safe with everything, especially not when you're in that step one, create, coming up with a bunch of ideas and just making concepts before you refine. So that's that also plays in here. I hadn't thought about that, but really if you get refinement before creation in a way, it can really stifle how you sustain yourself through the work. I think it puts a lot of pressure,
absolutely,
you know.
absolutely. I mean that goes back to our revision discussion of like you've got to
Yeah.
if you're set in down in the weeds on the minutia of the local concerns, it's just I mean you're just setting yourself up to hit walls. I feel like,
Mhm.
and one of the things that I was thinking about too within this conversation of kind of circling back to why do we need this, which I think we've talked a
Yes.
lot about tonight. I wrote down right because art is not like doing the dishes, uh, and what I was trying to get at here is when you're doing the dishes right, there's not like it's not really taxing in the same way that creating is, right? You've got something that's very replicable. You clean the same plates. As long as you've got the physical energy, right? You can go, you can do the dishes. They're either dirty and then
Yes.
they're clean. That it's a simple task. Take the dirty dishes, make them clean, whatever mood you're in, whatever. As long as you've got the will and the energy to do it, right? It's going to be a replicable task that's the same way every time. Creative work it's like not replicable like that. Like it's more taxing. And when you finish the dishes, maybe you're a little tired and your hands are a little clammy from being in the soap water. But you're not. There's not something that's a loss. Like there's a loss that accompanies creative work. Like even in a good day of creative work, and you've just poured out something and you've made something that you're really excited about. it's like you've been emptied of something. And when people talk about that, I think metaphor correctly, like there's a tax or there's a loss or there's an emptying that happens in creative work that unless you find some way to balance that or to fill that or to be more holistic, uh, you just can't. I mean, you could sit down and grind out dishes every day, but you can't just sit down and grind out creative work. Like it's just
Yeah.
it's different. I mean, we as human beings respond to creative work in a different way than we would with like doing these replicable tasks. Do you have any thoughts
Yeah.
on that? Like,
Oh,
does it
yeah.
seem
Well, it's funny because I mean, dishes can even be the opposite. Like dishes can be something that you would do. You're having a bad day. You're stressed and frustrated. It's like, let me just go do some dishes because I don't want to think. It's like it's actually easier to do when things are hard. But if you're in a bad headspace, you're having an argument with someone, you're struggling, you're feeling extra insecurities because of something, you like are in that emotional space that, and then you go and you're trying to write about a song about something confident and strong, and you're just like, you can't do it, you know, and you can't just. It's just not the same as a dish. Like you said, it's an emptying, and a lot of times, creative work is this personal message or this personal thing that you've experienced that you're sharing with the world, and so you're emptying yourself of that experience for others, sharing what you're learning or what you're feeling. Sometimes it's very cathartic and therapeutic and helpful, but other times, I mean, just in general, I mean, what my mentor said to me a few weeks ago was when talking about the inspiration and the music and things like that. He was like, it almost feels like you have injured yourself. You're like a weightlifter. You've pulled a muscle lifting, and so you're going to go back into the gym now, and you need to just hold the bar and just lift the bar, no weights on it, because you could put more weight on, but you just pulled a muscle, and so you want to work on your form and
dude,
just
that's
get
so
that
good.
form right.
That's such
And
a good
I thought that
metaphor.
was such a good, yeah, he had, it was great. And I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm feeling. Like, I feel like, I went through a season of working really hard, kind of strained myself a bit, got a little burnt out. And so now I need to just go back, open up
Recover.
Ableton and work on music, but I'm not putting anything out. I'm not putting the weights on. I'm just working on my form, just working on the fundamentals. And if you don't work on your form and you just keep putting more and more weight on, you can do great things until you pop your muscle and then you're
Exactly.
out for your career.
Sure.
And
Sure.
that's the whole concept of sustain is
Oh, I wish we had
trying
that
to do
metaphor
this for
early. That was
trying to do
perfect.
this for the long term, like trying to be lifting weights still in 15, 30, 50 years. That was something else he said in this Keep Going book. He said, I don't even read the 30 under 30 list. I want to be on the 8 over 80 list. Like the people who are found the thing that they love doing and they kept doing it into their 80s. And obviously that's not the same for everyone. You're probably not going to be like a Olympic gymnast in your 80s necessarily, but
It was a metaphor.
yeah, man.
Cut us a
The
break.
long term, it's just that's what it is. Sustain.
Yeah, I like the connection you made with recover. That's kind of the big one, right? Big sustain is
Mhm.
recovery,
Yeah.
getting ready for the next project, and then there's the micro sustain, which is within the process. So recovery, I think that's a great analogy.
Love it, man. Do you have any more thoughts or things that you'd wanted to share?
I think we've hit most of what I wanted to touch on, but I think the last thing I'll say is really think about the question where do you sustain, because I think that's huge, for me at least, right? It's getting
Mhm.
outside, it's getting into nature, um,
Yeah.
it's doing something that's very much outside of my day-to-day schedule, and I think it's really valuable. So I would encourage,
Mhm.
whoever's listening, uh, think about where you recover and where you know sustain, and how your physical like presence in a place is important, not only for in the work, day to day, but also for kind of the big things. I mean, what we're trying to get at, I feel like in a vacation sometime, is that, and we can have a whole episode about creative vacations or just like how
Yes.
vacations can become like really almost unhealthy. But the idea of a vacation is literally to move, to go somewhere, to recover, and to sustain. and it can't be so much pressure on it. But I don't know. Be mindful of place. I'm always gonna, I feel like, say that you're embodied when you're working. You're in a place.
Mhm.
You're in an environment. Thinking about that, being intentional with that, I think that's important for sustaining.
I love that. I just love the ideas you've kind of driven in tonight about doing things, being aware of your environment, doing things slowly, having a routine, being aware of what tools you're using and where you're working, and just all the really tactile things that go into sitting down and creating. There's something that's really, it's kind of a bit of a meme in music production that like there's this constant itch to buy gear and try gear out and stuff, and it doesn't help make you better at all. It just, you spend more money. It's just, but at the same time there's something about like when I do see these like really beautiful studios with all this equipment and like some incense burning and it's just candles lit and it's total just really great ambient vibe. It's like there's something about that. It's peaceful and evokes creativity. And so I just love this sort of idea of slowing down and appreciating where you are and what environment is around you, and as you kind of sustain in the day to day.
Yeah,
This
man.
has been great, man.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to wrap up. And wrapping up this episode on sustain, but also wrapping up the 4-part creative principles series. I'm glad that we've got these out here. I'm excited because really, I think we're going to come back. We're going to reference this a lot. And this is going to be fundamental to the craft. So I'm excited for that, getting this groundwork laid for more episodes to come. If you've got any recommendations on how we might sustain, or you want to share how you try to sustain and what that looks like for you, email us at heycraft. Oh, okay. What's the email?
Hey Craft Podcast. Yeah.
Hey, I almost shot for it, but heycraftpodcast at gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. We want to hear your thoughts about how you sustain, why you sustain, where you sustain. This will be a conversation that we're probably going to come back because it's a creative first principle, and talk about very specific things that are within this umbrella.
Definitely. And now that you've listened to these 4, you've heard the framework, please send us feedback on, what you do want us to talk about in the next episodes, because this really was our kind of big picture vision. These are the big buckets of things we want to talk about.
Our orthodoxy here.
Creative orthodoxy. So, if you have a topic or idea, something that you really feel passionate about, you want to talk about, send us an email at heycraftpodcast. And that's it. See you guys in the next episode. Hey, thanks for listening to The Craft with Carter and Colby, where we share what we're learning about the creative process. If you're a writer, music producer, marketer, filmmaker, photographer, or you just love creativity, then this show is for you. Our cover art was designed by Elizabeth Newell. You can learn more about her work at elizabethnewelldesign.com. That's Elizabeth, Newell design.com. And you can follow her on Instagram at Elizabeth is a designer. If you like the show, there's 3 things you can do to help us out. First, subscribe so you learn when we post new episodes. Second, send the link to one of your friends who you think would enjoy the show. Really, word of mouth is going to be the number one way we grow the show in any way. And 3, if you have a topic you want us to cover, or feedback about how we can improve the show, or comments on what we've said, you can respond to heycraftpodcast@gmail.com, HEYCRAFT podcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.